Live.
And we're live.
You are live.
I am also live.
You are. Hello, everyone.
Even when you don't feel like you're alive.
Welcome to At 9. I'm going to bring these gentlemen in.
Everybody come in and take a seat.
Yeah. Get all cozy. Get ready to spend some time hanging out. Hi, Katie.
Oh, hi, Katie.
We'll come in on now.
Katie, Jody.
Listening with eyes closed.
Is that what they call it?
Yeah, I was going to say.
No, we should do this.
Listen with eyes closed. I would be out. That would be
yeah, that she will be by the end. Welcome.
Watching.
Hello.
All right. With eyes open.
Yes.
Yeah. She's praying for us.
We need it.
Yes. Always. We always need it. Welcome, everyone. Let us know that you're here. It's the only way for us to know that you are here is by commenting right now.
I'm here. Are you here?
We are here. I am here. Are you here?
I'm not all there, but I'm here.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for the jokes.
Fiddlers are here. Hi, Karen and Bruce.
Fiddlers.
And it is 9:01.
Yeah, let's do this.
All right.
We're going to pause the button. We're going to come back to, we're talking about some of Peter Scazzero's material last week. Hello, Terry. We're going to come back next week to that. And we're going to talk about a super light and airy subject tonight. And I'm joking because it's not. And, you know, I was noticing last week, one of the few redeeming qualities of social media on Facebook is the memories feature, and it kind of tells you what was happening in all the other years on that day in your life. And last week was the week that all the beginning of the pandemic memories popped up. It was like when we all became aware of all that. And it was really, you know, it was interesting for me, Andy and Daria, was like just the amount of emotion that dredged up.
Mm.
Hi, Felicia.
Yeah.
And
distract you.
You know, it's been, I mean, I don't think I need to speak for anybody on this. We all have our stories of when we look back and we remember when this all began, and we thought it was going to be a couple weeks or maybe a couple months. And, you know, here we are later with the weight of all of the, you know, very large ways and very small ways that has changed our lives. So you've lost a loved one, or you've struggled with it, or you've had someone who's still dealing with the effects of COVID-19. But all of us have, you know, kids who have missed sports seasons and recitals and graduations and all of that. And it's interesting, like just hanging out with my 6-year-old son who's missed an entire year of learning how to make friends and be a little boy. And so we all have these kind of the weight of all that. And then last week we had the shooting in Atlanta, and, you know, with all of the overtones and the complexity and just the tragedy of that. And then yesterday we had yet another one in Boulder, Colorado, where 10 people lost their lives. And, you know, one of the things I confess to as a pastor and as a person is, how do you respond to things like that? Especially when it seems like they happen a lot. And especially in the kind of with the background of all of the other stuff that we all experience and have experienced this year. And, you know, especially if you're a follower of Jesus, how do you engage in a world that could very easily steal your joy and leave you depressed and in a little ball, you know, on the ground somewhere? But how do you also not just check out and pretend like none of it has happened? How do you sit in the tension of being engaged in the pain and the struggle of the world? Because it seems like that's what Jesus followers would do, and that is indeed what they do. But not getting run over by it, because there's so much of it and there's so much heaviness to it. But also just not checking out completely. You know, if you get run over by this stuff, and I have done that, you kind of become useless to the people around you who need you. But if you just kind of sail through life like nothing is happening, it misses something. And in the Bible, there's a whole bunch of verses that talk about how the Jesus followers respond to these weighty kinds of things. In the book of Romans, which the Apostle Paul was writing to the Christians in Rome, the Jewish Christians in Rome, and he started off this chapter talking about how do you worship. Like, is this the chapter where, if you know your Bible verses, this is the one that starts off, therefore offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, as holy and pleasing unto God. This is your spiritual act of worship. But one of the ways you do that in verse 15 is to rejoice with those who rejoice and to mourn with those who mourn. Jesus said this curious statement in the Sermon on the Mount, and the Sermon on the Mount was basically where Jesus showed up and said, this is how my kingdom operates. This is how my people operate in the world. Blessed are those who mourn, for they'll be comforted. And the Apostle Paul, again, in the book of Galatians, he said, you don't just sail through the world, and when everybody else is going through stuff, you just pretend like they're not. Whether it's people you know, whether it's people you don't know. He said, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you fulfill the law of Christ. So when you do this, you are actually acting like Jesus did. And so the trick we have is, as Jesus followers, we look around us, and you look around you, Andy and Daria, and all you folks who are on with us, you look around you and you see the heaviness of the world. You see it in the news. You see the brokenness. You see evil. You see the effects of disease, and it's pretty overwhelming. And, we obviously believe, if you're a Jesus follower, and I want to offer hope to this, that, that God is writing the end of the story. God gets the last word. Death doesn't have the last word. Sin doesn't have the last word. The grave doesn't have the last word. I'm going to preach right now. We have a living hope in Jesus. We're going to celebrate that in just a couple of weeks at Easter. But it doesn't negate the fact that all of these things, that we feel them and we experience them. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about is something that this is a uniquely good place to talk about, a good time and a good format, is how do we stay connected? How do we do all those things we just talked about? Mourn with those who mourn, carry each other's burdens. How do you enter into suffering in the world without getting overwhelmed by suffering in the world? And what I really would love for us to talk about tonight is this thing that, if we're honest, like, especially, if you grew up in the kind of church background I did, we didn't do much talking about. And it's the thing called lament. And everybody's like, ooh, this is happy. I'm glad I came tonight. But there's actually this biblical practice. Like, if you go read in the book of the Psalms, there are more Psalms written that are laments than, I think, almost any other kind of Psalm. There's a lot of different types of Psalms, but there's a lot of what they basically are written as is, God, what in the world is going on? I trust you, but what in the world is going on? And Daria, I know you've had some experience kind of teaching through this and journeying through this with some folks. What does this crazy word mean? We know what it means, but what does that kind of look like? What does that look like as a practice?
Yeah, I think at least recently, I know we go through pockets of it and we go through ebbs and flows of it, but it's a passionate expression of grief and sorrow. And what I'm journeying with some people with right now, as we process and lament and feel the things that are going on around us, it is really giving space to talk about it. What I am looking at, like where Michael is talking about not being overtaken by it and not being engulfed in it, so you can't be, a help and a listening ear to somebody else and it not taking over your life. What we're in our conversations, my conversations offline are, I am paying attention to what people are saying on social media, but I'm paying attention to the people that I'm friends with, the people that I am close with that are directly being affected right now. I can get very overwhelmed by reading and watching the news.
Oh, yes.
So I tend to, after this last year, especially, we went from watching everything that's going on with COVID to backing it up every single day because we felt exactly what you're saying. We were suffocated by it. So really, it's really taking the it's not really, for me, it's that passionate expression of grief and sorrow for what is going on around me. So even, last week I have friends who are Asian that are really struggling and they're in pain, and I want to hear them. I want to give them space where they can speak and tell me their stories. If they want to be angry and share their hurt, I want to hear it. Last night, another tragic event. I felt last night, I think that's where this whole word lament for me really hit home in the last couple of days, is because I felt it was a strong feeling. It wasn't just grief alone, where I was just, emotional and sad for something and then moved on. It has been something that it's strong. I feel the passion for it. I feel the physical part of it in really wanting to walk people through things, but be a listening ear. I feel like we don't give enough space for listening. And I am not God. We are not God, everyone sitting here right now. So I cannot be that to other people, and I'm not in control of the world and what is going on. But what I do know is that I can be a comfort, a listening ear, somebody who cares and loves, and can point people back to Christ, those that don't know him and people who know him. Like, you want to listen to them, and you don't want to be like, oh, let me pull out all this scripture for you as you're going through pain and suffering. And those who are so scared and fearful of what's going on around them and they don't know the Lord, yes, I want to point them to hope in Jesus, and that they don't have to always live in that state of fear. It is a very overwhelming, heavy time, though. I will be honest with everybody in saying that I have felt it very deeply lately. And so for me, that's where I'm in this place of lament and praying and pouring my heart out to God, because I don't know what to say and do sometimes.
Yeah,
I feel lost.
There's so much good in what you said there. The first thing is, this is a biblical practice.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the ancient people did this before God. And so, anytime I think we struggle a little bit to sit in anything other than, it's okay, it's great, I'm happy, the joy of the Lord is my strength, and it is. Yeah. But God can handle this, and right. we see this, and it's actually it's part of the human condition, mm-hmm. that we are faced with the brokenness. One of the things I was thinking about as you were talking about, Darius, is most of us rush past this, right? Even I've done this, and I should know better, but there are blessings. Like in the past year, there's been blessings in the midst of it, yeah, but it doesn't make it good,
right?
It doesn't make the experience good. And so it's easy to rush past that. And yes, we should count our blessings, and we should be thankful, and we should do that, but also to fail to acknowledge all that is lost. And one of the things I think that's unique about this, one of the reasons I think we really struggle to do this, is because it brings us face to face with our limitations. Mm-hmm. It brings us face to face with evil, as the events of last night and last week. Yeah. It brings us face to face with death. It brings mm-hmm. us face to face with loss. Mm-hmm. None of us like to be face to face with any of that stuff for very long. And not just I think not just because it's negative, but because it reminds us how not God we are, mm-hmm. how not in control we really are, how fragile we, in the words of Sting, how fragile we really are. And so it's really what it is it's actually sitting before, and this is how the ancients did it, by the way. If you read the Psalms of Lament, for instance, they sat with their grief before God. Mm-hmm. They sat with the pain before God. They actually offered it as an act of worship, mm-hmm. To God. And so it's, the way I'd actually defined it was it's a form of incarnated mourning. And what that means is you're actually present with people in it. And it allows us to, it forces us to sit in the midst of realizing that we're not God, and trust that God is God, even in the midst of the things that we don't understand. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, when you look at a shooting that happened in Boulder, Colorado, there's not a lot any of us can do about that. We can't pray it away. Mm-hmm. Most of us don't know any of the people involved. but we feel the weight of it because we feel the weight of the loss. We feel the reminder of the brokenness of our world, the limits of our lives, and how fragile those lives are. And that's a pretty heavy thing. But it's sitting with God. It's sitting with the grief and with God in the midst of it. But you were talking about something else, Daria, that I thought was really important, which is mourning with those who mourn. And some of the events, the direct events of so many of these things don't affect us, and it's very easy for us to just say, well, it doesn't affect me, so I'm not really going to worry. It's bad, it's sad, it's terrible, but I'm not going to worry about it. But is actually finding people who are experiencing this differently than we are, and giving them space and giving them permission to express themselves. And that's where I think it becomes personal for us.
Yeah, I think oftentimes we don't know what to say, so we don't say anything. And I think that's where I've fallen into. And it wasn't until I was on a different meeting earlier this week where people spoke up, and they, as we were praying and asking them, like, what should we be doing? Because we feel at a loss. And they just said, there are so many people that have stories to share and have hurt to share, but no one wants to hear it, or no one is willing to hear it. That sometimes they just got to get it out. If you imagine stuff you've gone through over the last 30 years being suppressed inside and not being able to speak it out, that's really hard. That's really, I honestly can't even fathom. So that's where I feel like that whole space thing is super important. And like you said, if we take on everybody and everything, it becomes so overwhelming and suffocating. But we all know people that this is actually directly hurting. And maybe you don't, but in some way, work, in your travel, whatever, there's somebody. And sometimes it's just having a conversation and just letting them speak and not us having to do. They just want to be heard.
Yeah, and that's, it was interesting to make this a little personal. Last week when all the stuff happened in Atlanta, I sat at the table with my wife, who is Asian, and I said, you have a lived experience that I don't have. How does this encounter you differently than? And we had a conversation. We've been married a long time, and we had a conversation we haven't really had. She said, I'm traveling there in another month, and it really, changes how I feel about that. And it's a little scary. And, but the important thing, like when we show up to those conversations, is we're not there to fix it.
Right.
We're not there to solve it. We're not there to take we're not there to take it away. That's what Jesus does. There's a passage I didn't put up that's really been close to me this past week. It's a good, before Easter passage in Isaiah 53. And the prophet is talking about the Messiah who's going to come. And he says, surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. We can't take up other people's pain. We can't bear their suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him. And by his wounds, we are healed. And that last verse, it's not just talking about physical healing. It's talking about emotional healing. It's talking about spiritual healing. It's a holistic approach that the work of Christ is the thing that actually brings us healing. So we can't bear that. And if we try to bear it, it will crush us. We can be present in it, knowing that the presence of God is with us, in us, and shines through us and ministers by the power of the Holy Spirit through us. And trust that, like we said, that the temptation, whenever you encounter grief or you encounter lament or you encounter losses, you're just reminded of how not God you are.
Right.
It's too big. It's, you're not in control. And most of us like to run from that, or we like to, get out of there as soon as we can. And a practice of a lament is saying, I can boldly step into this space with these very strong things because of who God is, because of who Jesus in a passage like that has promised himself to be. And that his presence goes with us into the midst of those places and with those people and in those conversations. And, I think if the church really embraced this, if we really embraced this and held onto it as an article of faith that God is strong enough, that he's big enough for the pain of the world, that he gave himself, that Jesus gave himself for all of the pain and all of the suffering, of the world, instead of just saying, how quickly can we get back to the happy stuff?
Mhm.
I think we would see a much deeper, um, just a much deeper way of living appear. And I think there's another part to this too. Whenever you measure something, I have a measuring tape and we measure things all the time.
Mm.
What are you doing? You're defining the distance between a couple of different points.
Mhm.
And one of the things I found is the people who are the most joyful, truly joyful, not just happy, but joyful, like they have joy in the midst of suffering and difficulty, are the people who have faced down their sorrows.
Mm.
They've faced down the pain in their lives and in their world. They've looked it square in the face with the presence of God, and they've sat in that and they've done that. And what happens when you do that is it's like you're measuring one point, you're measuring sorrow, but then it allows you to measure joy.
Mm.
It allows you to have an accurate perspective of how to live all of life. And so when we're sitting in stuff like this, when we're actually lamenting and mourning, and by the way, I'm not good at this.
Mm.
I realized that today. It's a great thing for us to remind ourselves. It is what we're actually doing is we're kind of emptying ourselves of it. We're letting it flow out so that we can be filled again. And instead of carrying it all around with us. And I think such a good thing for so many of us to do on the 1 year anniversary of the pandemic really would be to bring this all before God, bring the little stuff, the big stuff.
Yeah.
If it feels overwhelming to do it alone, find someone who can walk with you in it, but trust, let that be your act of worship.
Yeah.
Let that be the thing you offer. It seems like a terrible offering, right? And God, like, hey, God, here's all my pain. But what does it say in Isaiah? It says, surely he took up our pain.
Yeah.
Jesus took up your pain. He took up my pain. He took up our pain. He bore it. And he carried it to the cross. And he does that for us. And that's the hope that we have. The hope that we have is not that, we just have to hang on and after some time it'll feel a little better because it'll be a little farther in the past. The hope that we have is not, I have to fill my life with happy things so that the sad things get drowned out. The hope that we have is that we can bring this all to Jesus. All of the little things, your kids missed sports season, your family member that suffered and died, the people who are going through things that you and I can't even understand, but they're going through them and we know that they are.
Yeah.
That we can bring that to Jesus and he can transform it. He gives us beauty for ashes, the scripture says, the oil of gladness for mourning, and that's who he is. And I think we can do that faithfully and hope. And I feel like I should pray the organ should play softly because I've been preaching.
No, you're good. The only thing I was going to add to what you're saying is I think you're hitting every point is don't even, I would just encourage you to just not even focus on like main events of what's happened on to like, you can't move forward unless you actually deal with it and process it and lament it. And so if you have children or if you're around children and, let them talk. I think our kids have so much to say. I'm so guilty of being like, okay, I need like 5 seconds. That's a lot of spewing as soon as you walk in the door, or if you haven't been at school, you're all that they're talking to. We have to let them speak and listen because they're holding in so much, just like people like elderly who have been by themselves. Yeah. Every single one of us sitting here tonight, every single neighbor that we have, everyone is experiencing life and this pandemic and all the hurt and heaviness in a different way. And I think that's important too when we think about listening to people. It's not always what we think.
What does that look like? How do you listen? How do you incarnate? There's my favorite word again. But how do you listen in a way that is with people?
Oh, you want me to talk? I feel like I've talked a lot. You haven't said much.
I'm done talking. That's all we get. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
How do you do this so it's not just like, yeah, here's some Bible verses?
No, I actually tend to not do that now. Like, I actually just want to listen to what they're feeling. I actually don't speak a lot. If I'm truly listening in this kind of situations that we're talking about, I really just want to be there and let them know that I am here. No agendas. I have nothing, but that I am here. I am willing to listen. I grieve with them. Conversations seem to go, we used to always start surface levels, and sometimes that's still there, but I have noticed that conversations, even just walking around a neighborhood, go deep fast, because people haven't had the opportunity to share a lot. And so I think it's just listening, not listening to respond, but just listening to hear and have empathy, to tell them that you're sorry, that they're feeling, like how the heaviness of all of it, that you I don't know, you understand. I really don't know. I'm processing through this with everybody, so I don't have any answers.
As you're talking, a phrase from my there's this he's a pastor. He was actually he started out his pastoral ministry in a trauma ward. So he started out basically as a chaplain for people who had lost loved ones, like very dramatically and suddenly. And he wrote an incredible book. His name is Steve Cuss, but he talks about being a non-anxious presence. And it's this idea that, when you're present with somebody, you actually communicate things, even if you're not saying a word. And so basically non-anxious presence is, I don't need to get something from this.
Right.
I don't need this to go a certain way for me to be okay.
Right.
It doesn't need to resolve. This person's pain is not going to overwhelm me. So I control it, and I don't need to minimize it, and I don't need to cut it down to a size that I can manage. That's where trusting in who God is really, really important.
Right.
But it's being present to those conversations when a person is talking, and not having to control them, and not having to have it arrive at a certain outcome. But this has been a skill that I've been trying to learn, because it's like I'm just not good at it. And
it's hard.
We want to help, and sometimes when we help, we actually it seems like we're doing it for the other person, but we're actually doing it for us.
Right.
We're actually we're moving it in a direction that suits us a little better, puts us on more comfortable territory, and spiritualize that all day long. But it's basically being present, being actively present, but not having to drag, not having to land it in a certain place. Trust that God can sit in the discontinuity with that person and with you and through both of you together. Those are something that came to mind.
That's good.
Andy, I'd love to hear your thoughts on
I mean, it's a hard thing. You're talking about lamenting with other people. Daria's got plenty of experience of, just going out, walking around and people sharing their stuff. But I'll walk around, I'll see my neighbors. The women aren't going to talk to me about their stuff. The men, they keep it bottled in. I got neighbors that the one right next door, who's really, really an old guy, and I want to come alongside and help him pull a boulder out of the ground, which he's using his own bare hands pulling. It's something I got to do on my own. That's the mentality. So
did you actually pull an actual boulder out of the ground?
He did. He pulled an actual boulder. I mean, stone is like this. This was about I gotta get you camera.
Okay,
about this big, huge. And he's
this isn't a metaphor.
No.
He's pulling it out of the ground with his bare hands. I'm like, you're really going to hurt yourself. He's got hard stuff, but it's just we keep this stuff bottled in.
Man, why do we do that? Why do we do that, men? Pastor Andy, why do men do that?
Oh my good gracious! Because it's the manly thing to do. You don't talk about your emotions. If I'm a kid talking to my dad about my emotions, and this isn't my dad, it's everybody's dad. You're talking about your emotions. It's like, I don't want to hear that. You don't talk about your be a man, walk it off. That whole thing. So that at least it's from childhood being taught as you get older. It's definitely a learned behavior, but also something that's like, yeah, that's not something a guy does. I'm not going to talk about my feelings because that's something between me and me. So the lament part of it, it's challenging to do that with other people, but then it's also like we're taught through, I mean, at least the time that I grew up, transparency is weakness. Thank you, Bruce. Yes,
yeah.
it is. Transparency is absolutely, it's weakness. So it's perceived weakness. I don't want to be perceived as weak. So I'm not going to go into this thing sharing where my flaws are, where I'm faulted. So lament for me, it doesn't become a thing I do with other people or for other people. It becomes something I just do for myself. When I fall, when I sin, when I'm not doing the right thing, and so it's all internalized, and that's why we die younger. No, but
it's why you cannot, and that's the thing. I don't think I said this well before. When you don't do this, you carry it with you.
Yes.
Like if you don't clear out the bucket, it stays in the bucket, and it yeah, Andrea, you're absolutely right. It is a generational thing as well, but you carry it around, and it's why sometimes there's people that have triggers that they can't even, they just fly off the hand.
Don't even know where it comes from.
They don't know where it comes from.
Exactly.
And so much of this, the flip side of this though is that especially for people who other people look to for direction, that's leaders, that's parents, you do not abdicate. This is like the son of the lament conversation, is like part 2. Whenever you are working your way through stuff, you do not abdicate your leadership role.
Right.
And so what that means is it means that you have to figure out a way, you have to figure out a space that you can do this in that doesn't take the people who look to you for direction on a ride. This is something as a leader I've discovered like over and over again. I've discovered it in my family. There's people who look to you for strength, and it doesn't mean you always have to pretend to be strong, but you have to be aware that just because you're working through some stuff doesn't mean that the leadership influence that you have in your life, whether you're a boss, whether you're a parent, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a pastor, it doesn't mean that goes away. And so you have to be very aware of the journey you're taking the people on who are looking to you for directional leadership. And so I think that makes it a little trickier. It doesn't mean that we don't do it, but it means we have to define the spaces that we do it in. But also, if we don't do it, we end up taking them on the ride anyway.
Yes.
Because then they deal with our responses and our reactions. And I think all of us in this past year can look at probably some of the ways we've responded to those that we love and realize that it's as a result of stuff we haven't dealt with in ourselves.
Very true.
Yeah, this is a pretty big conversation.
It is a big conversation, but I think it's stuff that it needs to be had, because if we're supposed to be coming alongside other people, we have to know that we have to clear out our own stuff, and we have to lament and feel the feelings, and be able to come alongside them. We have to do that first. So there, like Andy was saying, there's 2 parts to it too that we have to be mindful of. And honestly, it comes back to that we're not God in any of it.
No, you can't fix it.
We are not.
I think that's another reason men hate this, by the way.
Yeah.
Because it reminds us of our limitation.
Yeah, you can't fix it.
It was our weakness. We can't be God. Us good Christian men would never say we were, but we like to pretend that we are. So, it just is. It reminds us of our limitedness, and it forces us to trust God, and that's hard, honestly. Even for those of us who are like, oh, I trust God. Well, it's like you don't know how much you trust God until you need to trust God.
Right.
You don't. You discover how they say that you discover that God is all you need when God is all you have.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Until
God is all you have. Yeah.
Yes. We know what you're saying.
I just told her right now. There was no,
I'll put it in the comment section when we're done. I know exactly what you're talking about.
And then what should I lament? There's so many things to lament.
Right.
How Native Americans were treated when America was kind of found, slavery, all those kinds of things. I've been watching all these documentaries lately, and every one of them is it's killing me. And so what do you lament? What's the right time to lament? I think there's like you said, we do this with God, so it's, I guess, whatever he's laying on your heart at the moment. But like, how am I supposed to feel about what happened? How am I supposed to feel about what these other people are going through that aren't it doesn't affect me? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, let's define lament this way. Let's say lament is it's a form of worship where the substance is grief.
Yep.
Instead of happy songs or money or serving or doing nice things or reading the scriptures or whatever but the other things we call worship, it's actually that same idea, except with grief, whether it's when you look at the sins of our fathers, forefathers, things that we technically had nothing to do with, but now we are participant in. You look at our personal sin. When you look at evil and brokenness and illness and death, when you look at the COVID-19 pandemic and all of the ways that it's had its effects, when you look at racism, when you look at death and violence in our culture, when you look at, one of the things I lament a lot is, we know about kind of what goes on with abortion and things like that in the background of our lives, but it's like my wife and I it was so hard for us to have the kids that we had, that whenever I run into those statistics, I just lament, because I know that something we fought for is something that is very easily thrown away by other people, and it's just a lament that is present in our world, and but just to lay it down before God,
yes,
and to realize that in order to do that, we actually enlarge our capacity to give the presence of God to the people around us in the world. It's 9:36.
Yeah.
Heavy topic.
Yeah, this has been a light. We'll get back to a little bit later.
Yeah, we'll get back to peace because
I'll tell more jokes.
But honestly, I think we all felt the heaviness that was going on around us, and we're processing through it too. And we say it every week that we love at 9 with you all, because we're taking things that are very relevant that we're all processing and going through and wanting to walk through it with you as well. So it's a journey that we're on together.
Yeah. And thanks for kind of journeying with us, and just receive the facts that whatever you feel like you're facing, whatever you see the other people around you facing, that God has gone there, and that he's here to bear our pain, our griefs, our shortcomings. He's here to bear the sins of the world, the evil and the violence of the world, the loss that we all have experienced. And it's by what he did that we are healed. But it's also, we participate in that with others. We participate in being the presence of God very tangibly with other people as we walk through that with them as well. As always, we have our online Connect card. If there's any way we can pray for you, if there's something that you're going through right now that it's just the Facebook comment section is probably a little on the nose to share it. We would love to serve you and walk alongside you any way we can. And if it's just helping you navigate that, helping you understand maybe the events of the past couple weeks or whatever, they've really rattled you in some ways. They've reminded you of some things that you kind of had wished you'd forgotten. And we'd love to pray for you. We'd love to serve you any way you can. You could fill that out with any level of information that's comfortable. One of us will be in touch. But also, we will hang out here for a couple minutes after, and we'd love to interact with you in any way that we can. Daria, I'd love for you to pray for all of us as we journey through this.
Sure.
Just let it lead you, and let's just close in prayer.
Okay. Heavenly Father, I thank you that in a season of heaviness and pain, we know that you are in control and that you are faithful and that you are journeying right with us. I pray tonight as we all sit before you and with you, feeling all different emotions. I pray, Father, that we would be able to remember that we are not you. that we are here to listen well to others. Maybe it's letting them just open up and share their story. Maybe it's just listening and not having any words to say. And maybe it is something that you've put on our hearts to share with them. Father, whatever it is, I pray that we would realize that in the midst of pain, there is still good and there is still joy, and we need to look for it. I pray that we wouldn't be so overwhelmed and consumed with the heaviness, but that we also wouldn't push it aside and ignore it and just keep walking just because it doesn't affect us directly. I would even say that I pray that we would come into path with people who it is directly affecting and who feel lost and don't know what to look to or who to look to or what to do, Father. There is so much pain and hopelessness right now, and we have answers. Those of us that are believers have answers for them of just comfort and love. And so I pray, even though we all don't have the answers, I don't have the answers, I pray that you would help us to lament well, that we would remember that prayers of lament are a form of worship and faith. We have said it multiple times tonight, and that seems strange to say, but it is. And so I pray that you continue to help us, show us what that means, what that looks like, but help us to not lose focus of you being in control, and that you do have our hearts in the palm of your hands, and that you are journeying with those who are in excruciating pain, and that you are with our children when they're going through a year that they never would have expected, that you are with our family members who might have been in the hospital alone and our friends, that you are walking with our friends and family who are so burdened and pained by the race injustice that's going on. Father, there are so many things I can list right now, but I know that you are in control. I know that you are good and faithful. And I just pray that you continue to show us how to lament well and love well. And it's in your name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Well, thank you all for hanging out with us. And you want the last word? We'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Have a good night.